Hello everyone and thank you for watching the channel. In today's video I want to present a case that has huge repercussions for the planet and for the people. Over the years there have been a series of problems at several nuclear power plants, as you can see in these pictures. Most were not very serious for humanity and affected some employees who worked in the power plant, and that's it. After Chernobyl, which happened in 1986 in Ukraine and which threw into the atmosphere and into the nearby city quantities of radiation, recently there existed a similar case, but it was not as publicized. We're talking about the disaster at Fukushima Daiichi in Japan that happened in 2011 because of an earthquake of magnitude 9 on the Richter scale that also created a tsunami with waves over 14 meters in height. This plant was capable of producing 4.7 gigawatts of electricity, which was enough to power 14 million homes. Being located 230 kilometers from Tokyo, the city was the main beneficiary of this energy. This plant had 6 reactors, but at the time of the accident only 4 were functional and only these had to suffer. There were plans before the earthquake to build 2 more reactors in the area, the 7th and the 8th one. The reactor buildings were 60 meters in height, the reactor core was a 20-meter cylinder made of steel. It was surrounded by an isolation vessel made of steel and concrete, which had the role of isolating the nuclear fuel. The earthquake of March 11, 2011 first stopped the electricity, and so the systems that were used to cool the container did not work anymore. Then the fuel became so hot that it evaporated the water inside the core. The temperature reached 2000 degrees Celsius, and because of this the cylinder melted and the liquid ran into the isolation vessel, where it merged with the concrete, and so it came to form a dense mass that had 17 tons. The engineer's approach here was to constantly pump water to cool the nuclear fuel until they could find a solution for the extraction of the radioactive materials. In the surrounding area, over 100,000 people were evacuated and the radioactive materials were thrown into the atmosphere and into the water over a radius of 30 kilometers. Within a radius of 20 kilometers can be entered only under supervision of the authorities at present. What exactly happened in the boiler? Reactor 1 is the one that first melted, then an explosion devastated the building. The liquid from the second reactor also followed, but there was no explosion here. The building with the third reactor had the same fate as the first one. A melt occurred and then an explosion due to hydrogen gas. Reactor 4 was not filled with nuclear fluid at the time, but an explosion took place because hydrogen from reactor 3 ran into it. The most affected reactors, as we can find out, were the first, the second and the third. The source of the contamination is the fuel inside the reactor that came to the surface and was carried to sea by rainwater, groundwater or basin water. Immediately after the disaster, everything was completely covered to prevent the spread of radioactive substances into the atmosphere. The people who intervened in the area had to wear 3 pairs of gloves, 2 pairs of socks and special suits to prevent contaminated particles from sticking to their skin, as well as special air filtration equipment. Currently, the outfits used in the area are collecting radioactive particles and need to be changed 2-3 times a day. Robotic hands are also used to perform certain activities that are too difficult or dangerous for humans. It is estimated then in 2023 the reactive liquid will be extracted. A big problem is the water that either comes from rainfall or the water used to cool the reactor. It needs to be pumped, purified and then stored in order to not contaminate further the environment. This contaminated water is processed to be decontaminated and it takes 6 to 7 years to do so, but it's not really efficient because decontamination manages to eliminate all radioactive substances except for tritium. The water is kept in containers and sometimes they have leaks. Experts are still thinking about what to do next with this water, but the solutions offered did not seem very good. They thought to inject it into the depths of the earth, to throw it in the ocean, or to evaporate it. In my opinion, the safest method for humanity, but not the cheapest, would be that the water that is still contaminated, and even the fuel once it's extracted, to be thrown into space with the help of a shuttle. It would float for thousands of years until radioactivity is no longer a problem. A large amount of very radioactive water, almost 15,000 tons, is also blocked into the tunnels below the power station, tunnels that were meant to collect the water from the ocean and use it for cooling the reactors. In the containers are held almost 1 million tons of contaminated water used in the cooling of the reactor, and by 2022 it is estimated that there will be no space to hold it, and most likely this will be discharged into the Pacific Ocean. Over the years, a large amount of contaminated water has reached the ocean because of these tunnels, but the problem is also the rainwater that comes underground through groundwater and carries in the ocean the radioactive substances that have seeped into the earth. An experiment showed that if the level of contaminated water inside the reactor is lower than the level of the outside water, the contaminated water will not spread outside the structure. In the first 6 months, however, following the disaster, the level of the water inside was higher than the level of the water outside the construction, and this means that the contaminated water was poured into the oceans further and contaminated large parts of the ocean. In the case of solid radioactive substances still to be found there, the plan is for them to be maintained until 2029. By 2036, it is intended to completely remove radioactive substances for the site, and by 2051, the decommissioning of buildings will be completed. The biggest problem is the lifting of radioactive materials inside the reactor because no human can approach them, the radiation level being too high. To this end, they are working on the construction of robots and robotic arms that have a laser tip that would be able to cut the concrete mixed with the nuclear liquid. This is the second largest disaster produced in a nuclear power plant after the one in Chernobyl, but there have been hundreds of accidents during the time in power stations all over the globe. More than this, over the last decades, more than 2,000 nuclear tests have been performed, that is, nuclear explosions in a lot of places on the Earth, and all have resulted in the release of radioactive dust and materials into the atmosphere. This is the end of the clip, so please give me a like, share and subscribe. I thank you for watching the video and I wish you a good day or a pleasant evening. Goodbye.